Biodiversity and human impact. Biodiversity is a measure of the number and variety of organisms found in a specific region. If there's a lot of biodiversity, if there's a large number of organisms and a large variety of organisms, then that means an ecosystem or region is very healthy. There are several regions that are called biodiversity hotspots. These are places where there is an exceptionally large number of species in a relatively small area. I want you to think of tropical rainforests that are filled with a variety of plants and animals. Now, these ecosystems sometimes change, and hopefully they end up in equilibrium, a nice balance. But every once in a while, there is a disturbance, such as a geological event, a fire, or human activity. Primary succession occurs on soil or bare rock where no life previously existed, such as following a volcanic eruption. Secondary succession happens when there is a disturbance that disrupts but does not completely destroy the community. The regrowth of an area following a forest fire is an example of secondary succession. Let's take a look at these definitions. Succession is the series of changes that occur over time following a disturbance. Primary succession is succession on newly exposed ground, such as following a volcanic eruption. Secondary succession is succession in partially disturbed areas, such as following a forest fire. Here we can see the progress of succession over time, where after a disturbance, small plants and animals start to come back to the area. This invites larger plants and larger animals until we restore our area. Stewardship is important. Stewardship is the active assumption of responsibility for the welfare of our environment. As Christians, we are called to be stewards of the earth. It's our responsibility to care for the God-given creations, to care for the planet in which we live. There is a whole branch of ecology called restoration ecology. This is the renewal of degraded or destroyed ecosystems through active human intervention. Many scientists around the world are trying to restore ecosystems, trying to clean up garbage in the ocean, trying to replant trees in areas that were clear-cutted by developers. If we have biodiversity, then we benefit from it. We're going to take a look at the benefits of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Ecosystems can regulate, they can provide, they can support, and they can enrich our culture. Ecosystem regulation is the process of the regulation of air quality, climate, water runoff, erosion, and pollination. Healthy ecosystems ensure that we regulate all of these areas. Healthy ecosystems provide us food, water, fuel, natural medicines, and biomass that we can use for energy. Healthy ecosystems and biodiversity support the cycling of nutrients so we don't have to rely on man-made fertilizers. They support photosynthesis so that we can return oxygen into the atmosphere and take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Supporting biodiversity supports habitat for all of our different organisms so that they will have a place to live. And supporting biodiversity supports connectivity. We talked about connectivity earlier on. It is important to take care of all ecosystems because certain organisms rely on more than one ecosystem. They are connected to different ecosystems. But we also count on biodiversity to provide cultural service. We use ecosystems for recreation. Some tourism is based on ecology, and we call this ecotourism. And Ecosystems are incorporated in many spiritualities among different native peoples and religions, including Canada's own Indigenous peoples. Here's a diagram that shows the various needs and services that ecosystems provide to us. Now, there are threats to biodiversity. The threats come in 4 different categories: habitat loss, pollution, overexploitation, and invasive species. Habitat loss threatens biodiversity. Examples of habitat loss include deforestation, the draining of wetlands, urban sprawl, and the disruption of connectivity. Each of these processes decrease the biodiversity and are threats to our ecosystem. Pollution from factories, households, and businesses decrease biodiversity and threaten our ecosystems. Overexploitation, such as overfishing or taking too much fish out of the ocean or lakes. Tourism traffic. Too many people visiting a sensitive ecosystem can cause damage to the ecosystem. Clear cutting forests, taking out all of the trees, destroys ecosystems. We tend to do this to develop land and for the paper and pulp industry and the timber industry. The worst case of overexploitation is when we've done this too much and the species is now extinct, no longer to return to the environment. Invasive species are special organisms. These species invade our ecosystem. They cause harm to native populations. They compete with our native populations for food and resources, and sometimes they attack and kill our native organisms. Let's take a special look at invasive species in Canada. First, we're going to talk about 2 different types of species: alien species and then specifically invasive species. An alien species is a species that accidentally or deliberately introduced itself into a new location. Now, not all of these alien species are bad for ecosystems. If they are bad, then we call them invasive species. An invasive species is a species that can take over the habitat of native species. For example, zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are mollusks, and you can find them along the rocks and boats inside our lake system. The zebra mussel is native to Asia, and these freshwater mollusks were introduced into the Great Lakes through the ballast water of boats. When boats rise or sink, they do so by taking in water or removing water. If they take in water from a lake, then they will release that water wherever they are. Any organisms that were once taken in are now released into the new environment. Now, there's a problem with zebra mussels because they outcompete native mussels and crustaceans in our own lakes for food. A second example of an invasive species in Canada are the round gobies. The round gobies are an Asian fish that arrived in ballast water and have been found breeding around Lake Erie shipwrecks and shores. The problem with the round gobies is that they compete with native fish for spawning areas, and they eat the eggs of native fish. This alien species is invasive because it's harming our own native population of fish. Third, we have the emerald ash borer beetle. Hamilton has lost over 20,000 ash trees in recent years that were infested by this green little beetle. We've tried to control this situation, and over a 10-year program has spent $2.6 million every year annually to remove the emerald ash borer beetle from our region. Removal began in 2013, and the data that we have is only available to the end of 2019. But we haven't stopped trying to get rid of this invasive species. And the final invasive species is one that we talked about at the beginning of the biology unit, and this is the Asian carp. The Asian carp were brought from Asia to North America in the 1960s and 70s, and tens of millions of dollars per year in damages have occurred because of this fish and its destruction to our natural habitats, especially here in Hamilton and especially in sensitive areas such as Cootes Paradise. Please make sure to complete any LMS activities on this section.